Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Fire and Ice podcast. My name is Chris Crawford. Thanks so much for joining us. Today is Thursday, September 14th. We're going to be looking at some DFS plays today, some lineups to stack, some pitchers to use, and maybe some sneaky players using the Contrarian Edge Optimizer. I'm joined today by my good buddy, Drew Silva. Drew, how are you doing this Thursday?
Hanging in there, man. I recall you saying this time last week that we've had really good luck on the weather front for like
Yes.
late summer, early fall, and then there have been about 1,000 delays or postponements this week alone. So
I won't be held
good job,
responsible,
Chris.
but it's absolutely my fault. Somebody from Seattle should never be talking about rain because we know
Yeah.
what's going to happen, man. We know what is going to happen. And that kind of segues perfectly into this. It looks like there's only one game that could have any issues, and that's the very last game of the game day. Colorado against San Francisco. And it doesn't even look like it's going to be massive storm fronts or anything like that. It does. And by the way, we are not meteorologists. We did not see the weather coming for Boston, New York necessarily. And that game ends up being rained out. That's why there's a doubleheader there and creates some interesting fantasy options actually as well. So with the bad comes some good. But it looks like that's the only one you really have to be cognizant of. Everything else either being played in the dome, being played early enough that we're not going to really have any issues. On the injury front, however, Drew, there's a bunch of stuff going on. And maybe we should lead off with the Max Scherzer injury, just because I think that's the biggest story, not only of, everything. This is an absolute massive story, something that's really going to have an effect for the remainder of the year for sure.
Yeah, placed on the 15-day injured list Wednesday after being diagnosed with a low-grade strain of the teres major muscle in his right shoulder. He'll definitely miss the rest of the regular season. That's already been determined. There's going to be a 2-week shutdown, and he's probably going to be out for the playoffs as well. Maybe if the Rangers march to the World Series, that he could return for that. But it's all pretty doubtful that he's going to pitch again in 2023. And yeah, the Rangers have played a dangerous game with bringing in these top flight starters who carry durability concerns. Jacob deGrom being the most debilitating case for the organization, signs a 5-year, was it $185 million contract?
Yeah.
Over the winter, makes only 6 starts before requiring Tommy John surgery that's going to keep him out until probably August of next year. And then, now with Scherzer giving up top infield prospect, how do you say his name? Luis Angel Acuna? I think I nailed
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, they gave him away at the deadline to get Scherzer and a lot of money from the Mets. And granted, like Scherzer's generally been a workhorse over the course of his 16-year major league career, but he's had multiple injuries pop up here and there over the last handful of seasons. He's 39 years old with a lot of tread on the tires.
Right.
I very much appreciate the aggressiveness from the Rangers that they're willing to spend money and prospect capital to turn that thing around so quickly. But this is a big organizational setback. They've spent 150 days this year at the top of the AL West standings. They're certainly still in the mix for the division title or one of the 3 AL wildcard spots, but the hill to climb just got a whole lot steeper.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see how they manage this thing. They will have some off days where they can maybe skip a starter, use some of those guys. That'll make some of their more interesting options going forward. But this is just such a massive loss, not only for the rest of the regular season, but for the postseason, because we've seen Max Scherzer in the postseason put up some absolutely dominating efforts. One of the better big game pitchers. By the way, I've just been stunned we talked about it before we started recording, Drew. This Toronto series has been something fascinating to watch because talk about two teams that came in on opposite ends of the spectrum. Texas falling apart a little bit, Toronto taking advantage of an easy schedule for sure, but looking pretty great. And all Texas has done is absolutely dominated. And when I say dominated, I mean dominated this series.
Yeah.
Are you as shocked as I am?
Yeah, man. And Blue Jays fans are freaking out.
Yeah.
And rightly so. And I've got some of these players in our stacks and starting pitchers, starting pitching recommendations. So we'll dig into that series finale on Thursday a little more closely. Some other injury concerns that apply to this Thursday slate. It is a bigger Thursday slate than we usually get, so that's
Which
nice.
is
We have a
nice.
little more to dig into. But Christian Yelich, be aware that he's had a lingering back injury. It's been an off and on thing for a couple of years now, and He hasn't started a game for the Brewers since last Friday. He's said to be improving, though. He could potentially return for Thursday's series finale against the Marlins. Also for Milwaukee, leading into Thursday's matinee against Miami, Mark Canha is doubtful to play after receiving a cortisone injection for left wrist soreness that prompted his early removal on Tuesday. Imaging scans showed no structural damage in Canha's wrist, but it's common for there to be a multi-day rest period after a cortisone shot, so he's not going to play on Thursday. Maybe he returns for Friday's series opener against the Nationals. Ronnie Mauricio was held out of the Mets lineup Wednesday against the Diamondbacks because of an illness. Doesn't sound like anything serious, but they could give him another day off Thursday with nothing really left to play for in Queens. Make sure that he's up to 100% health. It's kind of unfortunate timing for Mauricio, who hit his first career major league homer on Tuesday. He's batted .306 through his first 38 plate appearances with the Mets, who made him a September 1st call-up. Another one, Jazz Chisholm, made an early exit Wednesday with knee discomfort. Probably won't play in Thursday's series finale at Milwaukee. And then Ryan Mountcastle, also an early exit with some shoulder discomfort on Wednesday. It's a quick turnaround for the Orioles. Just finished up a series against the Cardinals. Now they open a series against the Rays on Thursday. And then keep an eye out on the status of Rangers outfielder Leody Taveras, who was scratched from the lineup Wednesday. They still didn't say why, so maybe it was just a simple lineup change. Taveras has been in a good groove lately, part of that dominating series so far for the Rangers. He's 15 for 37 with 3 steals over his last 10 games. So maybe we get a status update on him before that series finale kicks off.
Have you ever had a cortisone shot before?
No.
They look terrible. They look
like I've heard they're painful.
I mean, just looking at that needle is a hard pass for me. Like, I understand. I was trying to explain to somebody that, like, hey, why are they out of the lineup after taking a shot? And it's like, I don't think you quite understand what this shot is going to do to you. Yeah, I'm glad you've never had one. I'm glad I've never had one as well, because they don't sound like a whole heck of a lot of fun. Let's go over some lineup stacks, and I'll start just because Drew, you just had to talk a whole bunch. I'll give your voice a rest. I'm going to go with the Reds today against the Tigers. I'm kind of playing the contrarian here a little bit in terms of the fact that I think it's time for Reese Olson to have some regression. He's been really good in his last few starts, has allowed no more than 1 run in those last 3, is coming off against 6 2/3 innings of 2-run baseball. That follows 7 innings of shutout baseball. But those came against the White Sox, Drew. And the start before that came against the Yankees lineup that was before they had their big revitalization of these September call-ups. I will bet on the Reds having a really nice offensive day today. And the optimizer, the contrarian edge optimizer, really likes the Reds today. And so I am going to go with a 5 stack today. I'm going to go with Elly De La Cruz, Tyler Stevenson, Noelvi Marte, TJ Friedel, and Jake Fraley. I like all 5 of those guys to have big days. I like the Reds offense to have a really nice day, even in Detroit. Feel better about it if it was in Great American Small Park, but certainly think that this Cincinnati lineup is capable of doing real damage today.
The Reds are currently tied with the Diamondbacks, the exact same record for that 3rd NL wildcard spot. So there's the motivation to,
there you go,
put some runs on the board.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Giants at Colorado, because why not?
Yeah.
It seems like I'm always riding with the Giants offense when we do these Thursday shows, but they've had a lot of Thursday games on these lighter slates over the last month. And, the contrarian edge optimizer always likes them again today. And hey, they're playing at Coors Field on Thursday night, coming off their first back-to-back series wins in more than a month. After just taking 2 of 3 from the Guardians. And there was a sweep of this same Rockies team back in San Francisco last weekend. It all sets up well for these Giants to really feast in that wonderful ballpark in Denver. Wonderful for hitters, at least, and for DFS plays with the thin air and the spacious fair territory surface area. I'm seeing a lot of extra base hits for the Giants in this one against right-hander Chase Anderson and his 6.49 season ERA. You could stack some lefties against Anderson. I have Lamont Wade in my lineup. He went 2 for 3 off the bench Wednesday against Cleveland with a walk-off RBI sac fly in the bottom of the 10th inning. And then some right-handed hitters that I trust in JD Davis, Wilmer Flores, Patrick Bailey. You could consider Jock Peterson as a lefty going against a righty, and Mike Yastrzemski too. He could bat leadoff. That could be a cheap leadoff option.
Sure.
It's a must-win game. It's a must-win series for the Giants, who woke up today just a half game back of the Reds and Diamondbacks for that third National League wildcard spot.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call. And by the way, make sure you're checking out that Contrarian Edge Optimizer. Bottom left-hand code for you, those of you who are joining us on YouTube. Use that code, get a chance to check that thing out. We can't recommend it enough. And not just for baseball. There's great stuff for the NFL. A great way to put your DFS lineup out there. Have a bunch of stuff coming up. Cannot recommend it enough. Drew, my other one, I should just say Jose Arenas pitching. Like that should be enough to say, hey, that's what's going on here. But I'll say more words because people like that. Some of them do anyway. I think the fact that the White Sox are one of the worst teams in baseball, the fact that they have one of the worst pitching staffs in baseball. So even when Arena exits this thing, you're going to get a chance to do some damage against that bullpen as well. I'm going to go with a 4-stack today of Edouard Julien, just a fun name to say, Royce Lewis, Carlos Correa, Max Kepler. I mean, playing in Chicago certainly offers some offensive upside. It wouldn't matter where that game was being played. It could be played at Yellowstone, playing through some torrential downpours. I would still like the Twins lineup today. It's just not a very good baseball team. And the Twins, of course, trying to cement this AL Central. I mean, they are the lock of locks to end up winning this division because nobody else tried, Drew. But it would be nice, I think, for them to lock things up, get to set their rotation. Definitely a motivated team still. The White Sox are just awful, and I'm going to be looking to stream outside of when Dylan Cease is on the mound. I'm going to be looking to stack against that team whenever it's possible.
Yeah, and there's some cheap options in that Twins lineup. Like,
Yeah,
you could make a really cheap stack and then like pay up to fill in your other spots with
sure.
some, more expensive hitters. I think that's actually a really good way to attack this slate is going with that Twins lineup against Jose Arena. I like the Yankees at the Red Sox. I mean, has there ever been less buzz about a Yankees Sox mid-September series?
Sure.
You could get into Fenway Park last night for $1 plus fees. Granted, that game got postponed because of
Yeah,
rain. So you'd have to have some availability for the makeup here on Thursday. It's worth keeping that in mind that this will be a double header, and neither team has anything to play for, so the lineups could be a little bit
sure.
wonky. But I think targeting this night game on the main slate, let's hope my stack here isn't actually in the lineup. Aaron Judge, Anthony Volpe, Estevan Florial, and Austin Wells hopefully doing the catching. Florial is interesting to me. Manager Aaron Boone has said he's going to play a lot down the stretch. They really want to see what they have in him. I want to see
Right.
what they have in him, a former top 50 prospect who has struggled badly in his time at the major league level. But this summer at AAA, a 945 OPS, 28 home runs, 79 RBIs, 25 stolen bases, and 83 runs scored in 101 games. Like, you can see that there's talent here, like especially the kind of fantasy skill set that we love with the power and the speed. Yeah, the Yankees want to see what he is, and I want to see what he is, and I want to see him start in the nightcap of Thursday's Twin Bill in Boston. We know that Austin Wells will catch one of the games.
Right.
Hopefully for me and for the way this slate sets up, hopefully it's the later game. Wells hasn't done much as a September call up to the Yankees, but he had an 802 OPS this year at AAA, a good hitting catcher who could be the future of the position there in the Bronx.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't think he is a fantasy star, but he is a guy that I think I like more in DFS than I like in a redraft league, just because, left-handed hitter with some pop, take advantage of those sight lines, facing the right guy. I like using him. I think that there are enough limitations to him that he's more of in redraft leagues, a catcher 2 than anybody who's ever going to be a catcher 1, former first-round pick. So that's a little bit disappointing, but there's still offensive upside with Wells. There's still a chance. And I like that call a lot. Like yesterday with Sarah and I was very much into stacking against Tanner Houck. I'm just not a Tanner Houck believer as a starter. I think he has a chance to be a real nice reliever someday. But in terms of being a starter, I'm not so sure. Speaking of starters, I'm going to go with Kyle Bradish today against the Rays. I'm a little nervous about it just because I don't think that Bradish is the star that he's been since the start of August. but he's pretty darn good. He had a 2.12 ERA in August. He has a 3.0 ERA so far in September, coming off a start against the Red Sox where he threw 6 innings of 2-run baseball, did allow 1 homer, but no walks, 9 strikeouts. He's actually been really good at missing bats. He struck out at least 7 batters in 4 of his last 5 starts. And in that one start that he did get 6 in 6 innings of quality baseball against an Arizona lineup. I'm just going to ride the hot hand here. And I also think Baltimore is going to end up winning this series and kind of take that AL East kind of by the stranglehold a little bit. And I think that it starts with today. Think it starts with Kyle Bradish picking up that W. I think he'll give you 6 innings of quality baseball, 7 or 8 strikeouts. You're probably going to want to pair it with an ace. Drew's got a couple of aces that he picked because I let him pick first because I just feel bad for the guy sometimes. But I do think Kyle Bradish is a very nice second starter for the Thursday slate.
Man, you look at that Rays lineup and just that Rays team in general, it doesn't seem very good on paper with everything that they've lost, but somehow they just keep winning. So, like, I want to say that the Orioles, I want to agree with you that the Orioles are going to take command of the AL East in this weekend, this big 4-game series, but I don't feel confident in it at all.
Fair.
Even though, like, all the data says, yeah, that's the way it should go. It's
right.
just the Rays are unbelievable. There's some serious Rays magic going on.
There really is.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I've kind of targeted some of the aces here. Kevin Gausman versus the Rangers, probably the most obvious choice for a starting pitcher on this slate. It's definitely a little bit chalky, but the optimizer likes him. I like him, and it's not really hard to explain why. He racked up 10 strikeouts over 8 innings of 1-run ball in his last turn through the Blue Jays rotation. That was against the Royals, and the Rangers present a tougher test than the Royals, but I don't know, that team had been hitting a wall just before this series began, and Gausman should cruise at home with a good amount of Ks and solid run prevention and a good shot at a win as the Blue Jays aim to avoid what would be a brutal 4-game sweep. I think they get right on Thursday. Overall this season, Gausman has posted a 3.28 ERA, 1.17 whip, 217 strikeouts, and 167 and a third innings. Talk about must wins. Toronto is currently 1 game back of the 3rd American League wildcard spot, with the Rangers currently occupying the 2nd AL wildcard spot. That's really flipped over the last 3 days. There's a crowd of worthy teams vying to make the AL side of the wildcard mix. Can't necessarily say the same about the NL wildcard hunt. Gausman knows what's at stake. The Blue Jays know what's at stake. I expect him to at least be really solid and perhaps dominate. I think he's a really good safe floor, high upside pick as your starting pitcher on this fine Thursday. You have to pay up for him, but hey, maybe take pieces of what Chris was saying, use the Twins stack and use Gausman as your starter or one of your starters if you're playing in a 2-starter format.
That's why they pay you the big buck, Drews, because you have good ideas like that. That's exactly what I would be doing. I definitely want Gausman in my lineup. I cannot imagine, and of course, freezing cold takes, so be it. Hey, we're Fantasy Fire and Ice. We have to have some freezing cold takes if they end up getting that sweep. No, that was good, Drew. It was absolutely very, very good. Okay. But I do like that call a lot. And my guys, the next one I want to do, he's kind of ace-ish in terms of price, but I think he is a quality play. I'm going to go with Eury Perez against the Brewers. And one of the reasons why I like Perez is he has kind of struggled to miss bats over his last couple of starts, at least for him. Like, we saw that he has as much swing and miss stuff in one of the most dominating starts I've ever seen in those 6 innings of shutout baseball against the Dodgers on August 19th. Since then, he's struck out 7, 5, and 4, and he's walked 3 batters actually in these last 2. So there could be some tiring, even with the Marlins doing what they did with the shutdown there. But I just believe in Perez's stuff way too much to believe that this is what we're going to see for the rest of the year. I think he's going to be a guy who gets some strikeouts. The fact that Yelich may not be in the lineup today, again, is going to be a nice little thing to add to it as well. I think the Brewers, certainly with their right-handed bats, can be susceptible to strikeouts against somebody with Perez's stuff. I think he's kind of the contrarian play too a little bit, because you look at Milwaukee, who has been a much better team. Miami's still in this thing. It's hanging on by a thread, but they're still in this thing. I do think that Perez has a chance for a really big day on Thursday night.
Yeah, and the Marlins have managed his workload this year, which has been really frustrating for season-long fantasy
Yes.
players. Like, they sent him down to the minors for a month, and but the reason they did that is so that he could be at his best right now,
Yeah.
as they try to make one of the NL wildcard spots. And I agree. I think it's a nice contrarian play because you know that dominance is in there,
Yeah.
and there's no reason for them to pull him early from this game. They need that win. I like that play a lot. I think it makes a lot of sense. My other starter that I'm going to recommend is Kenta Maeda at the
Mm,
White Sox. Minnesota's 7.5 games up on first place in the American League Central standings, and that magic number counter has started to appear across social media. They're closing in on locking that division down, going up against a White Sox team, interdivisional White Sox team that is thrown in the towel. Maeda has run into a couple of blowups and hasn't been working particularly deep into games, but this is a spot for him to get right and eat some innings and make his case for postseason roster consideration. He's definitely on the fringe of that right now. But 96 strikeouts and 89 innings this season. Not a great ERA, but he's shown decent command, has a decent whip. I like a good number of strikeouts for him Thursday on the south side of Chicago at a relatively good price point on whichever DFS service you're using.
sure.
He's not the dude who finished second in the American League Cy Young Award balloting in 2020. There's been a Tommy John surgery between that point and this point, but he can still generate a lot of swing and miss. He's shown that throughout the year, and the White Sox lineup should oblige that swing and miss ability, and I think generate, all combined to generate a pretty good fantasy scoring outing. I really like Eury Perez, though. If you're doing the two starter thing, I think Gausman Perez is like a pretty nice play with a Twins stack. We're really making lineups on this show.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. And let's take a look at those lineups and look at some cheap optimizer plays that we can be looking at. As you can see, the optimizer very much likes the Twins and likes the Giants today. There is a lot of that, even without selecting a stack. They like a lot of these guys. Just taking a look, Corey Seager, which is far from a contrarian play, but has just been scorching
Yeah.
hot with the bat. Drew and I talked about it before. He's now tied for fifth in WAR, even after only playing 102 baseball games. He's been excellent. He's somebody that, if you believe in, Kevin Gausman, great pitcher, but certainly a guy who has a chance to put up a nice little day. Justin Turner, I think that's an interesting little contrarian play as well. Not a guy necessarily that gets a ton of love, I think, at this point in his career, but it could be a nice little play. Robbie Grossman, again, if you're looking to keep riding the hot of the Rangers, I think that makes a lot of sense. Anybody here you're looking at, Drew?
Alex Kirilloff, and you talked about the Twins lineup, but
Yeah,
he's cheap. I don't think he was in your stack.
he
A
was not.
776 OPS he has an 845 OPS against right-handed pitching. And again, the Twins are facing a very beatable right-hander in Jose Urena. Kirilloff tends to hit pretty high in the Minnesota batting order against righties. There's been some spots where he's hit second recently. So he could do some damage at a cheap price. Willie Castro, too, stands out as well from that Twins lineup. Maybe he can get on base and make some noise. He's up to 31 stolen bases on the year. Pretty impressive with the speed. Ryan Jeffers, we're just naming the entire Twins lineup. I think it's, yeah. I mean, that's a game to really target in this. The optimizer likes a lot of Red Sox bet. You mentioned Justin Turner. Definitely worth keeping in mind again that this is a double header and the projected lineups might not wind up being the actual lineups, or probably definitely won't be the actual lineups, but cheap hitters like Pablo Reyes, Connor Wong, Trevor Story's cheap, he could, like, he's due for a big game. Adam Duvall is a little more expensive, and of course Rafael Devers. I said I'm going with a Yankees stack in this doubleheader, targeting mostly the night game because that fits into the main slate. There's definitely some cheap pieces of that lineup that you could plug in if you're just aware of who is actually playing. Oswaldo Cabrera is really cheap. He'll get a start in one half of the Twin Bill. I don't mind plugging him in and seeing if he can do some damage. He's been a big letdown at the major league level this season, but there's definitely talent there. And then there's some cheapies in that Orioles and Rays series opener,
Yeah,
like Adam Frazier, Luke Raley. I mean, up and down those lineups, the Rays and Orioles are like the teams that like to platoon those. So you got to be careful about who's actually going to be in there when the actual lineups come out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also was looking here. I think one of the more underrated DFS play right now is Rene Pinto. Rene Pinto's actually been really good with the bat this year and such a cheap play. Like looking at it here, $2,700 on DraftKings. That's, I mean, you add somebody like that, it basically guarantees that you can add one of those star bats to your lineup. I wanted to ask you about a pitcher real quick, Drew. Michael King, are you interested in using him at all today?
I think he's going in the early game, I
Yeah,
believe. And so is Tanner Houck. They've determined that so far. We don't know who's starting for the Red Sox in the night game, but
right,
yeah, I am totally intrigued by Michael King. They kind of put him in the rotation by default at first just to serve as an opener, and he's kept building up this pitch count,
right.
and he's been really like awesome to the point where is he going to be in their opening day rotation next year? Like I like the Yankees are going to have a lot of changes this offseason, so let's not try to absolutely predict it, but he has certainly made the case to be treated as a traditional starter. He has 3 pitches. He's not like a
No,
reliever who just relies on a fastball and a slider. I'd like to see it just as like someone who, because he's been in this setup role for the last couple of years where there's not a ton of fantasy value. I want to see him go 5, 6, 7 innings at a time, and so far it's played well, man. He's looked sharp.
yeah, I think so as well. And I think that the Red Sox lineup is not bereft of talent by any stretch of the imagination, but I still think if you're playing in that early slate, especially at that price, I think he is a player that makes sense to use.
We
That's
should
gonna
mention,
please.
yeah, I'd mention some Rockies too. Like I zeroed in on the Giants, but it's not like, I mean, the Rockies at home in Coors Field is gettable. They're facing Logan Webb, but they
Right.
got some cheap options there. Ezekiel Tovar, Elias Diaz, Ryan McMahon. I wouldn't mind throwing in 1 or 2 Rockies into my basic stack
I
as well.
think that absolutely makes sense. Look, Logan Webb, not exactly the superstar bat misser. I expect him to get a win. I expect him to be solid, but I think that makes sense to play as well. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Fantasy Fire and Ice podcast. Please make sure you're following all of our socials. Make sure you're checking out the website, sportstopia.io. Make sure you're subscribing and please hit that like button. It really helps. We really appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Crawford_MILB. Follow Drew at Drew Silv. Really appreciate it, and we will see you tomorrow.